Hey, you're listening to the wrong podcast. Topics today include inconsistency, incongruity, and intestinal toxicity.
Wrong!
It's the wrong podcast, but we'll make it right. Spinning the world in a whole new light. Winning wild and a little askew. And the one who's right, it might be you. It might be you.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm here to talk about politics, culture, religion, sports, and anything else you're not allowed to talk about in polite company. Issue number 1. What's wrong with you? I mentioned him last week, my favorite baseball writer, Sam Miller. He is taking over this topic slot in this podcast. I was listening to him on a podcast that he's on, and he and his co-host were talking about something called the 3 random fact rule. And the idea is that you can take any 3 random facts about anybody's life, and if you just take them out of context and portray them as kind of creepy, you can make anybody sound like a serial killer. For example, let's say there is a woman who brushes her teeth for exactly 2 minutes every time. Or a man has spent 18,000 hours studying World War II. Or you mentioned that a woman ate Cocoa Puffs every day for 3 years straight. Or, and this was about Sam. Sam said this about himself. He doesn't want to be a slave to caffeine. So every morning he flips a coin to decide whether or not he will have regular or decaf coffee. Every morning. Me, I yell into a microphone by myself. That's pretty weird, right? So there's this woman. Her name is Kathleen Kinman. Kathleen, it's so weird. She's an Australian. That's why it's not Kathleen, it's Kathleen. There's only one thing I need to tell you about Kathleen, and it will creep you out. It will creep you out. We don't need to know anything else about her at all. Kathleen was arrested for trying to sell the toes of a dead man. We could just walk away right there, right? There's nothing else we need to know about Ms. Kinman. Now, how did this come to be that she had a dead man's toes? Well, she was arrested. The police came in because she was trying to sell the dead man's toes. They come into her house. They say, where are the toes, Kathleen? You know what? Let's do it. I'm going to do an Australian accent here. Kathleen, where are the toes? That was so terrible. You're welcome. All right. So they come in, point us to the toes, Kathleen. And she points right behind her, and there's a shelf, and the toes are in a jar of formaldehyde. And next to the toes are other oddities. Let's call them oddities, like a dead guinea pig and a squirrel skull and things like this. And Kathleen is part of a online group of people who are fascinated by animal remains and bones and body parts in general. And she tries to sell these toes on this group, and she thinks she can get $400 for these toes. And you might be asking, where did she get the toes? If you're not, please ask yourself that question right now. I'll pause. Where did she get the toes? She got the toes because she worked at an animal shelter. Duh. No, that doesn't answer the question. She worked at an animal shelter, and these dogs came in. And these dogs were brought in because their owner had died. And whoever found the deceased body, they found the dogs, and they brought the dogs to the animal shelter while they tried to figure out how the man had died and all that kind of stuff. And the dogs get sick at the animal shelter and vomit up everything inside them. And that includes the dead man's toes. The dogs had been eating their owner's toes because they were hungry. And so, the shelter workers gave them food. They overate. because they were so hungry, and then they puked up the toes. This, of course, and some of you are thinking, this is really gross, Tim. Why are you talking about this? And I told you at the beginning of the podcast that this podcast is about anything I'm not allowed to talk about in polite company. So you signed up for it. So the coworker, Kathleen's coworker, freaks out. That's the word. She freaks out. I don't know how they say it in Australia, but here we say she freaked out and she had to leave work early. She was in distress. She leaves early. That leaves Kathleen alone with the dog vomit and the dog toes. And she gets this funny idea in her head that maybe she can make an extra buck. So she picks out the toes and takes them home. And that is why Kathleen is now serving in community service and on parole in the city of Melbourne. Issue number 2. What about it? I'm sure I've talked about this. I am positive I've talked about this, but I need to talk about it again because the point of this podcast is to keep me from getting in trouble online. And one of the things that really makes me want to get in trouble with people online, on social media, is whataboutisms. And here's the bottom line about whataboutisms. Cognitive dissonance is the most difficult thing for us to handle emotionally and intellectually. It is just like it fires up the stress areas of our brain the same way a bear chasing us does. It's the same thing in our head as a bear chasing us when we have cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when there are two contradictory facts and we want to hold them both as true and we don't know which one to believe. For example, a woman discovers her husband is cheating on her. She believes her husband is faithful and loyal and really loves her. And at the same time, she has evidence that he is committing adultery. She is experiencing cognitive dissonance. What to do with these two sets of facts that contradict one another. And we cannot stand this. Because we don't like bears chasing after us, we do anything in the world we can to get away from the bear and get out of the situation. And it's the same with cognitive dissonance. When we're in it, we try to get out of it as quickly as possible. And the easiest way for any of us to get out of this sort of situation, this sort of intellectual bind, is to find hypocrisy in the person telling us about the set of facts that we don't like. We point out some flaw in them. We say, you're stupid, or you're ugly, or your mom didn't love you. That's one way of getting out of it. That's the genetic fallacy. We say there's something wrong with the person delivering the news. Or we say, what about, and then we name something that they like or that they might believe in and point out the issues with what they believe in. So let's go with the woman who discovers her husband is committing adultery. Her sister tells her that her husband is committing adultery, and she says to her sister, well, yeah, but your husband, he drinks too much. Now, it could be that the sister's husband does drink too much, but that has nothing to do with the adultery being committed by her husband. It's just a quick way out of a situation. It relieves the stress in her mind. I found some way to point out what's wrong with you or what's wrong with your husband. It doesn't actually resolve the situation. And so when people do this, and we all do it, nobody is free of this. Nobody is free of this accusation. We all want to do this. This is the easiest way out of it for all of us. We all say, what about? What about this? What about that? What about so-and-so? And it's meaningless. It doesn't matter. Of course, you should maybe care about that other thing too. But just because that other thing exists doesn't mean that the bear chasing you isn't real. So listen for it. Listen for yourself saying, what about? And then stop it. Just stop it. Hey, it's time. What are the rules?
Oh, what are the rules? What are the rules? Don't touch my fries or my garden tools.
One of my love languages, in fact, it is my love language. The one love language I have is quality time. And there is something that people do that offends my notion of quality time. And it's something that I do. I'm just as guilty as anybody else of this, but I feel guilty. I feel shame when I do it. And that is something I like to call deep cover tourism. This is a concept you're aware of, but I couldn't find a word for it, so I invented one. The phrase, the word for what this is deep cover tourism. And it is when you travel to some other city, some other place, you're on vacation, you're on a business trip, and you know that there is somebody who lives in that city that you should say hi to, that you should spend some time with, you should get coffee with them, you should go get dinner with them, and you choose not to. You visit that place and you make sure that nobody knows you're there. You don't post about it on social media or on Instagram. You don't call the person, you don't text them. You just pretend like you're not there. You're a deep cover tourist. And I asked Claude. Claude is my jam. Claude's my AI assistant. That's the one I recommend for no reason other than it looks better than ChatGPT. But I asked Claude to write up a Urban Dictionary definition of deep cover tourist for me. And this is what Claude came up with.
A person who visits a city or town where they have friends, family, or connections, but deliberately doesn't tell anyone that they know that they are in town. Jack pulled a deep cover tourist last weekend, came to Chicago for a concert, but didn't tell any of his college buddies who lived there. He just wanted to enjoy the show without having to coordinate a whole reunion. Sometimes you gotta go deep cover tourist in your hometown. Book a hotel, eat at the touristy spots, and enjoy the place without your mom knowing you're only 15 minutes away.
Now, I'm not saying stop doing this. We all need to do it now. In the age of social media, it's just kind of a thing. We would never know that this was happening except for Instagram and Facebook and whatever else we're using. So of course it's happening. Keep it up. Keep lying to people. Keep deceiving them. I'm pretty sure that one of my brothers has done this to me at least twice. Keep it up. That's the way the world is. I know it. I'm going to stop being offended by it. But at least do me the favor. At least adopt the phrase deep cover tourist for me. Remember, I want to know what's wrong with you.
What's wrong with you?
If you'd like to submit a question, topic, or tell me how I was wrong, you can email me at listen@thewrongpodcast.com or submit a comment at my website, thewrongpodcast.com. And help me spread the wrong message. If you like what you hear, share it with your friends. Now it's time for my favorite part of the show. I was wrong.
I was wrong. Oh, I was wrong.
Listener Danny, who happens to be my father. Tim, regarding your last episode on whistling, one of the factors is that they're not putting songs to whistle form in movies, like they did in The Bridge Over the River Kwai. When I heard your podcast, I remembered instantly. But your mom said that I was hurting her ears as I whistled it. Listener Gerald, your comments on the judicial system were totally on target. Thanks, Danny and Gerald. Issue number 3! Where did it come from? Hey, I am going to tell you some cutting-edge research about the origins of the Book of Mormon. Cutting edge. But before I get to this cutting-edge research, I need to loop you in. I need to give you a little bit of information about the Book of Mormon and about what we know about how it came to be. So the basic storyline of the Book of Mormon is that there is this Jewish man living in Jerusalem about the same time as Isaiah. And he leaves Jerusalem with his family just before the Babylonian exile. So the Babylonians attack Judah. They take everybody from Judah and from the city of Jerusalem, and they ship them all to Babylon to make them their servants. And Lehi leaves before this happens. And he travels down through the Arabian Peninsula, and he sails across the ocean to the Americas. And when he gets to the Americas, he has two basic lines of descendants. They are the Nephites, and the Nephites are white-skinned and good, and then the Lamanites. The Lamanites are dark-skinned and evil. And the book is all about them and different characters from each side of the family and how they interact with one another and the wars they have. And at a certain point, about halfway through, after Jesus has died in Jerusalem and then raised from the dead, he visits the people in Israel, in present-day Israel. And then after 40 days, he leaves and he comes to the Americas and he preaches the gospel to the Nephites and to the Lamanites. And the Nephites accept the gospel, the Lamanites do not. That's the basic overview. Trust me, I'm missing a lot there, but that's the basic overview. And one thing I need to tell you about the Bible wasn't handed to us from God. It didn't float down on a cloud. God didn't write it all down and hand it to somebody. He didn't do that for any part of it. We Christians and Jews, we recognize that the Bible was written by men and we say that they were inspired by God when they wrote it. The Book of Mormon is different. The Book of Mormon was written by Nephite prophets. According to the Book of Mormon, it was written by Nephite prophets, and they wrote these things down on golden plates, and they were men and they were inspired by God. That part lines up with the Bible, but it was written in something called Reformed Egyptian, according to Joseph Smith. And Joseph Smith did not speak Reformed Egyptian. In fact, nobody speaks Reformed Egyptian because we have no evidence of a language called Reformed Egyptian. But that's what Joseph Smith called it. And he said that he was able to translate the Book of Mormon by the power of God. It was directly translated by the power of God. It wasn't his own. He didn't figure it out. God actually told him what each word meant as he translated. And that's how the English form of the Book of Mormon came to be. At a certain point in Joseph Smith's life, he was young. An angel shows up and says, hey, you need to go get the gold plates that I left in this hillside that happens to be near where you live. It's called the Hill Cumorah. Go dig there. You'll find a stone box and you'll find the gold plates in there. So Joseph Smith goes and gets the plates, and then he doesn't use them to translate the Book of Mormon. You might find lots of paintings and drawings of Joseph Smith sitting at a table, looking at gold plates, analyzing them, and reading off of them, and having somebody write down the words in English what he's reading. But everything we know about the translation process from the people who helped him translate the Book of Mormon was that the plates were nowhere to be found. They were hidden somewhere. He didn't actually need them. Instead, some say that he would put up a sheet. There was always a sheet, regardless of who it was. But they didn't see the people helping him translate the Book of Mormon. They didn't see the plates. There would be a sheet up between them, and Joseph would sit on the other side of the sheet. And what we mostly know is that he was using something called a seer stone. Now, he will say that he was using something called the Urim and Thummim, and that makes us think he was using some sort of glasses. But we actually know, and the LDS Church has put these seer stones on display. You can actually see photos of them. They have the stones. You can see them. He was using something called a seer stone. Before, I have to back up just a little bit for you, and I trust I'm going to land all of this for you. Before he was given the golden plates, Joseph used to participate in something called treasure digging. And he would go to farmers and he would tell them, hey, there is an ancient treasure buried on your property and I can help you find it. I've got this special seer stone that will tell us where the treasure is. And so give me some money. You'll make it all back when we find the treasure. And Joseph, he would take the stone that he had and he would put it in a hat and he would put his face in the hat, and the stone would illuminate and give him directions about where to look for the treasure. And they would walk around and they'd find the place to dig, and they'd start digging, and then something would go wrong, and Joseph would say, "Oh, the treasure has passed away. It slipped by. It's in a different part of the property now." And this is fraud. There's no other way to put it. It's fraud. He's being a con artist. It was against the law, and he repented of it. But when it comes to translating the Book of Mormon, he pulls out the seer stone and puts it in the hat and looks into the hat, and he calls out the words one by one. The plates are nowhere to be found. They're nowhere near him. He's got his hat and a seer stone. That's all he needs. And he calls out the words one by one to the person writing them down, doing the transcription. And occasionally he'll say, "How did you spell that?" And they'll say how they spelled it. And he's like, "No, that's not how it's spelled. It's actually spelled like this." So even down to the letters, not just word by word, but sometimes letter by letter, he was translating the Book of Mormon. And this was a very slow process. And it was very slow with about 4 people that he was working with. And then he worked with this other guy named Oliver Cowdery, and it was very fast. And Cowdery, when he describes it, he does not talk about the stone and the hat or plates. He doesn't tell us how they did it so quickly. It happened really quickly. So the Book of Mormon is written in the form of the King James Bible. It mimics the English of that Bible. It's not exactly King James English because it was written about, 300 years after the King James Version. And in the first version of the Book of Mormon, it's not in any Book of Mormon you would read right now. It was in the first version. It had a lot of mix of hillbillyisms. Joseph lived in upstate New York. It was basically the Wild Wild West at the time. And it would say things like, "I was running up a hill," or "he was a-chasing me," things like that. They later corrected all of that. They corrected all the grammar. They tried to bring it more in line with the King James Bible, the English of the King James Bible. But the intent was that it was supposed to sound like the King James Bible. And again, this was translated by the power of God. So God wanted it to sound like the King James Bible, even though that wasn't the English Joseph spoke at the time. And apparently God wanted it to say things like, "I was running up a hill." And they decided that was okay to change later on. One more thing I need to tell you about, and that is this term called anachronisms. An anachronism is when something doesn't fit historically to what it says it's about. So for example, let's say you find a newspaper article about Abraham Lincoln, and somebody's very excited because this illuminates some conversation that Lincoln had with Ulysses S. Grant about how to end the war. And the newspaper article says that Abraham Lincoln picked up the telephone and called Grant to tell him what he thought about the war plans. It doesn't matter how many accurate things are in that newspaper article. We know that newspaper article was not from Abraham Lincoln's day and age because it has one anachronism, and that is that Lincoln used a telephone. The telephone hadn't been invented yet, and it would have been impossible for Abraham Lincoln to call Grant to talk to him on the phone. So this newspaper article might get all kinds of things right, but because it mentions a telephone, we know that it was written much, much later. And unfortunately for the Book of Mormon, it has a number of anachronisms. And I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to give you a short snippet because I need to give you some context for some other things. Remember, the point of all of this is to get through some cutting-edge research being produced by Mormons about where the Book of Mormon came from. Okay, so some anachronisms in the Book of Mormon. It mentions all kinds of animals that didn't exist in the Americas at the time that it was written. So it was started purportedly 400 years before the life of Jesus, and then during the life of Jesus, and then a couple hundred years after the life of Jesus. Horses did not exist in the Americas at the time. Horses did at one point exist in the Americas before the Spanish colonists came, but they went extinct about 10,000 years before the Book of Mormon was purportedly written. And then the Spaniards brought horses with them. All kinds of other animals just like that mentioned in the Book of Mormon. One of the BYU apologists who attempts to defend the Book of Mormon, he says, oh, they weren't riding on horses, they were riding on tapirs. And Joseph Smith didn't know what a tapir was, so he made the decision to change it to horses because that's what he was familiar with. He didn't know of anybody who would ride on a tapir. He wouldn't even know what a tapir is. And as far as I know, nobody has ever ridden on a tapir into war. It also mentions metalwork, that they had the ability to, mold metals and things like that and create coins. It mentions wheat and barley. These are things that did not exist in pre-colonial America. Part of the Book of Mormon, I bring this up because part of the Book of Mormon, large chunks of it are just the book of Isaiah. They're copied and pasted from the King James Bible, chapters and chapters of the book of Isaiah. And what's interesting about those chapters of Isaiah is Isaiah has three basic parts. There's one part that's before the Babylonian exile. Then there's another part that's during the Babylonian exile, and a third part that's also during the exile. And you can distinguish these parts just by reading them in English. I want to remind you that Lehi left before the Babylonian exile. But in the Book of Mormon are passages from Isaiah from during the Babylonian exile. Now, it is totally possible that God inspired the prophets that were here in the Americas to write the same words that were written in the book of Isaiah. That's totally possible. I am open to God communicating the same thing to multiple people. The problem is the Dead Sea Scrolls. We know that parts of the King James Bible is a great version of the Bible. I recommend it to all of my friends who are over 400 years old. There are a few parts, they're not consequential parts, but there are a few parts that we know got it wrong. And the reason we know it got it wrong, because the Dead Seas were discovered about less than 100 years ago in a cave in the Middle East. And the copies of Isaiah that were in the Dead Sea Scrolls are older than the copies that the writers of the King James Bible were using when they translated it. So you want the oldest copies available of ancient manuscripts. We have manuscripts that are thousands of years, at least 1,000 years older than what was used for the King James Bible. And there are parts of it that are wrong. They got it wrong. They had the wrong information. Those parts that are wrong in the King James Bible are also wrong in the Book of Mormon. So if God was giving the same words to multiple people, he would have corrected what was wrong in the King James Bible. We're going to talk about this a little bit more later because it is important. During Joseph Smith's life, there was a very popular commentary called the Adam Clarke Commentary. And this was something that this guy named Adam Clarke, fancy that, he wrote about the Bible. He went through the Bible, he made notes, he made comments, and he was a Methodist. Methodism was very popular at the time. I guess it still is in some ways. But this was easily one of the most popular commentaries among the Methodists, was the Adam Clarke Commentary. And Joseph Smith joined the Methodist Church for a bit before he started the LDS Church. And his brother went to Dartmouth. He was not as uneducated as many people like to assume he was. And he likely had access to this commentary, to Adam Clarke's commentary. And you might be saying, no, that's weird. They were poor. Poor people didn't have biblical commentaries. Those are expensive. Well, this commentary was so popular that they were selling volumes of it for 12.5 cents each. You could get 2 volumes for a quarter. That's where shave and a haircut, 2 bits. Shave and a haircut, 2 bits. 2 bits is 25 cents. 1 bit is 12.5 cents. It's so weird that they had a coin for 12.5 bits. but you could get one of these volumes of Adam Clarke commentary for one bit, and it's very likely that Joseph Smith had access to this commentary or owned a copy of it himself. In fact, we know he did. And the reason we know he did is because of something called the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible. Now, the LDS, they use the King James Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Pearl of Great Price, and the Doctrine and Covenants. Those are their scriptures. Joseph Smith went through the Bible, and after he produced the Book of Mormon, he went through the Bible and said, no, I'm going to create my own translation of the Bible because I have this power from God. I'm a prophet, and I can fix what's wrong with the Bible because it's been translated incorrectly. And he created the Joseph Smith translation. The LDS Church uses the Joseph Smith translation, but they do not consider it scripture. They don't use it in place of the King James Version of the Bible. They instead use the King James Version of the Bible. And they will also read other versions. Some LDS will read other versions of the Bible. They're allowed to. They're allowed to read the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, but they don't use it in their books. You know, when they produce a book that has all of their scriptures, it does not have the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible. Now, a BYU, that's the LDS Church flagship university in Provo, Utah, a study was done there by a professor and some of his research assistants, and they looked at the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, and they compared it to the Adam Clarke commentaries. And it turns out that almost everything unique that's found in the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible was directly plagiarized from the Adam Clarke commentaries. He just copied and pasted over. They weren't Joseph Smith's original ideas. They were Adam Clarke's. And Joseph Smith put them in this translation of the Bible and said that God told him that this is the way it's supposed to be. And maybe God did. Maybe God was inspiring Adam Clarke, and Joseph Smith recognized it. But Joseph Smith claimed it as his own work. Now, I bring that up. That's important. But I bring all of that up because there is a forthcoming article by an LDS, a Latter-day Saint academic, and it is coming out sometime in the next year. And it is about Isaiah found in the Book of Mormon and what kind of influences might have gone into influencing the translation as a whole of the Book of Mormon. And like I said, there's large sections of Isaiah found in the Book of Mormon, and it is not all exactly like the King James Version. There are differences between Isaiah and the Book of Mormon. And it turns out that almost all of those differences can be explained by the Adam Clarke commentary. Adam Clarke, he had some ideas about how the King James Version of the Bible got it wrong in Isaiah. And there were some questions about what certain things meant. And he posed answers to those questions. Oh, this probably means this. And actually, this word should be this. And the Book of Mormon does not plagiarize the Adam Clarke commentary the way the Joseph Smith translation does. But if you are aware of all of the things that Adam Clarke has to say about Isaiah, it is very, very difficult not to read the Book of Mormon and say, oh, well, this answers this question exactly the way Adam Clarke said it should be answered. And oh, this changed this passage in exactly the same way that Adam Clarke said it should be changed. And just like the King James Version of the Bible, Adam Clarke got some things wrong based on the Dead Sea Scrolls. If he had had the Dead Sea Scrolls, he would have changed his answer completely. And the Book of Mormon goes with what Adam Clarke says rather than what the Dead Sea Scrolls says. So we know that Joseph Smith was highly influenced by Adam Clarke when he wrote the Book of Mormon. And this blows a hole in the idea that he was looking at a stone in a hat and going word by word. That doesn't appear to be the case at all. It seems like we know, at least in part, what one of the influences of the Book of Mormon was. Now, there are some other influences as well that we know of. There's a book called The View of the Hebrews, which suggests that the Israelites came to Americas, and there's all kinds of pseudo-historical explanations for why the Native Americans built these giant mounds and what kind of civilizations created all these things. We know about all of those things. But this is an instance where we know exactly which book Joseph Smith was probably looking at as he delivered large portions of the Book of Mormon. But I could be wrong. If you think I am, let me know. Let me know why. I had fun and I hope you did too. Bye-bye.
It might be you. It's the wrong podcast.